And while people are joining us and logging in, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for Let's Talk How to Speak About Anti-Black Racism within the local arts community. My name is Sophie Hinch and I'm the Education and Public Programs Coordinator at the Art Gallery of Windsor. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that while this conversation is happening digitally today, I want to recognize that I'm physically situated on Anishinaabe territory, the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. Today, the Anishinaabe of the Three Fires Confederacy are represented by Walpole Island First Nation, and I want to state my respect of the historical and ongoing authority of Walpole Island First Nation over its territory. Like I said, if at any point tonight you have a question for our panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask your questions. There will be a question and answer period towards the end of the panel discussion. And just to let everyone know that this panel is being recorded and will be posted and shared online as well afterwards. So you'll be able to go back and revisit the discussion. The AGW recognizes our responsibility to serve the community, and we recognize the role that we play in dismantling systems that have caused pain in our community. And as an institution, we're committed to working with BIPOC curators, artists, activists, creators, makers, educators to develop projects and exhibitions that focus on the works of Black, Indigenous, racialized Canadian artists. And we strongly encourage you to join us as we continue to listen, learn, and grow together. There's a continued call for action, and it's more than just a black square on social media, along with a statement. And those need to be backed up by concrete action. Cultural institutions have a duty to amplify BIPOC voices and lived experiences. And in these times, we need moments of joy. We need art, we need music, we need theater. We can have these meaningful conversations through art, and these conversations and next steps are a work in progress. So to help us to get uncomfortable and break through the decorum of political correctness, the AGW has partnered with Making It Awkward. And I'll pass it over to MIA's co-chair, Princess, to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Sophie. My name is Princess Doe. I am one of the co-chairs for Making It Awkward. We are a student-led social advocacy group based at the University of Windsor's School of Social Work that aims to push critical discourse and building capacity to address anti-Black racism within the Windsor-Essex community. One of the many ways we achieve this goal is by hosting and presenting and organizing educational events such as lectures, symposiums, and panels like the one that we're on tonight, which is why we are so pleased to be partnering with the Art Gallery of Windsor in hosting this event. Many of members of MIA are also engaged in various forms of arts through spoken word poetry, the theater, or in the case of myself, classical music. And as the pandemic continues on, it has been the arts and Black art particularly that has kept so many people sane and has been the primary source of support to get through these unprecedented times. That is why we look forward to the discussion tonight on racism and what that looks like in the Windsor arts industry, how we address it, and how we support our Black artists in the community going forward. So thank you to our panelists for joining us tonight. We very much appreciate it, as well as thank you to all who have joined us this Friday evening to hear this discussion on anti-Black racism within the arts. And then with that, I'll pass the virtual floor over to MIA's BSW student, as well as our moderator for tonight, Jessica.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Bonamensa. I'm currently in my final year of the social work program at the University of Windsor. I'm completing my placement with Making It Awkward, challenging anti-Black racism. I will be moderating tonight's discussion. This is an open discussion with community members, artists, educators, and activists on how to talk about anti-Black racism within the arts community. The purpose of this event is to foster discussion that takes a critical look at the arts community in Windsor-Essex and reflect on the legacy of Black art in the region and beyond. By engaging in these topics, we hope to see how the community can collectively address anti-Black racism within the arts industry.
And tonight we have 5 extraordinary Black artists, creators, makers, poets, activists, just amazing human beings all around who are leaders in the Windsor-Essex community. Our panelists include activist and community leader Joy Hurst, author and historian Irene Davis, painter and artist Monty Scott, actor, dancer, playwright Hesley Mccurdy, and slam poet and lyricist Eric Johnson.
Often when discussing art, the contributions of Black artists are typically an afterthought. Black art is deemed as inferior until proven otherwise by commercial success or financial proof. I'm happy to be part of showcasing the Black artists in Windsor. I will now give the panelists the opportunity to share a little about themselves and their origin story. I'll start with Joy Hurst to introduce herself.
Hi, thanks for having me on this panel. It's very important in our community. I'm Joy Hurst Morrison. I'm a graduate from Wayne County Community College in Detroit, Michigan. I'm the founder of the Coalition for Justice, Unity, Equity, chairperson for Windsor West Side Reunion, member of the BACC, which is the Black African Caribbean Canadian Community Board at Windsor-Essex Children's Aid Society. And I'm also a member of the NABC Network for the Advancement of Black Communities, and that's Toronto-based. And of course, the founder of Emancipation Monument Committee that we're working on right now. Thank you.
The next panelists can introduce themselves. Eric Johnson.
Hey everybody, my name is Eric Johnson. My stage name is Atomic. I am a slam poet, lyricist, and sometimes vocalist. I don't feel up to it. I have participated in many slam events, many spoken word events around the city. I'm closely associated with Mount Zion Full Gospel. That's actually where I got my start doing poetry. I grew up here in Windsor, Ontario, on the West End. Let's see what else. I've lent my talent to numerous rallies, anti-Black racism events, and I am currently the Windsor Poetry Slam champion at the moment. I've gone to a couple international or national poetry competitions, most notably CFSW. And that's all there's to say about me for right now.
Okay, I'll allow Monty Scott to introduce himself.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Monty Scott. I am a local artist from the Windsor area, born and raised. Artist, illustrator, sculptor / welder. I've been involved in the arts community in Windsor for upwards of 30 years. And I have a lot of really strong artistic roots here. I went to W.D. Lowe. I started off at W.D. Lowe here in Windsor and studied there and graduated from there and moved on to college and university and then college again at the Center for Creative Studies in Michigan to finalize my education. But the unique thing about my art journey, and I think most people can benefit from my story, is that I was born an art prodigy. I was never really taught how to do it, but I've been painting and drawing since I was 4. And 40 something years later, I've had a pretty distinguished career as a mixed media artist, a graphic illustrator, and a metal sculptor. My story, just like everybody else, super interesting. The life of the artist is, it always has its own uniqueness, and I'll be willing to share some of my stories with all of you. And I thank you all for giving me this opportunity in this forum to discuss the issues with being a Black artist and growing up in this area and having close roots also in the United States. It's time that these kind of discussions start happening, especially in the art community, because it's so important. And being somebody that lived a lot through a lot of it, I'm glad to have this opportunity to share with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to Hesley Mccurdy.
So as a child, I always knew I wanted to sing and dance. But my childhood history would be an example of the kind of blocks that are put into the way of young Black children. But I did eventually find my way to the University of Michigan, where I have a degree in dance and drama, a BFA, with teaching certification, because my parents insisted that I have something to fall back on in case, if I wanted to be a dancer. After dancing with Detroit City Dance Company for a couple of years and teaching in Detroit public schools for a couple of years, I was on my way to go to New York to dance with the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, which was my dream. And I tripped and fractured my hip and fell into acting. Since as an actress, I have written 2 one-woman plays, and I have toured with them for 23 years across Canada and United States, and even into London, England. I also try to I use my play performances as a platform for social activism. There are a lot of, I have Q&As after my performances where I try and teach anti-racist thinking to the young audiences so that they can understand as they're growing up the kind of forces that are impacting them to think and feel the way they do. So I've been doing that for some years. Yeah, I guess that's all I'll say for now, because I guess in the conversation, like Monty said, we'll be able to tell more about some of our experiences and our thoughts and things on the subject. But yeah, that's what I do.
And last but not least, Irene Moore-Davis.
Thank you, and hello everybody. So I'm an educator, I'm a historian, I'm an activist, I'm a painter, I'm a poet, I'm an author of historical nonfiction, I'm a podcaster. I am co-host of All Right in Sin City podcast, which focuses on writers and writing in the Detroit-Windsor borderlands. I contributed a chapter to a book called A Fluid Frontier, Slavery, Resistance, and the Underground Railroad in the Detroit River Borderlands. The book that I'm finishing now is called Our Own Two Hands, A History of Black Lives in Windsor and Sandwich from the 1700s forward. I've been for 14 years on the Bookfest Windsor Planning Committee, and this past year I was program chair. I was the secretary of the Underground Railroad Monument Committee of Windsor. I'm a co-executive producer of a short documentary called The North Was Our Canaan, which just premiered this past week and focuses on Sandwich Underground Railroad history. And we were so thrilled that it was selected for the Montreal Independent Film Festival and was a semi-finalist, although it didn't win, but we were happy it was there. I'm co-founder of Black Women of Forward Action. I'm co-founder of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force of Windsor-Essex. I'm a member of the National Dismantling Task Force of the Anglican Church of Canada, and I'm just happy to be here and looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you all for the introductions. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. So during this current climate of society where the Black Lives Matter movement is prominent, how has that affected your work? Have you seen any changes in the community or in the arts community?
Is that an open question, or is that for anybody to grab?
Anybody.
Anybody?
Yeah, anybody.
From my perspective, unofficial activist and spokesperson for Black Lives Matter, from a personal standpoint, it's been extremely inspirational as far as having the most relevance of this time. As an artist, you try and stay on the pulse of society, right? Not dragging or lagging behind it. And that's where it captured my interest, thus the George Floyd painting and many others that followed. The Black Lives movement was compelling for me because of the conversations that followed, the discussions that I've been able to have with people after I executed a piece of art that people were astounded by, just for the message itself. There were a lot of instances where a painting that I've done invoked 20 or 30 different responses or views of what that message is. It almost led me to think that maybe people weren't really focusing or focused on exactly what all of this means. And I say people because I don't want to generalize, but just I'll say people in their responses just gave me this idea that we have a long way to go, even opening up and sharing our ideas and thoughts. It still seems to be pretty difficult, which I find myself with a particular advantage because I have a canvas and a paintbrush, right? I don't really have to present myself as much as a painting. So I don't know, I guess my opinion there is a little bit biased, but like I alluded to earlier, I think that I think it's still a struggle all the way around, not just from a communication standpoint, but from a social standpoint. It just seems like we have so much more work to do than I initially thought before the initial excitement of the movement and the rush. Once you settle down, and as an artist, I'm speaking for myself, once I settled down and I started to do the artwork that I felt was relevant to that, that's when I started having these conversations with folks. My emails were reflecting a lot of different views, which was a good thing, but it seemed to me that a lot of it missed the overall point. And I think we have to maybe try harder to get that message across so that we have that longevity of the message. A message shouldn't just be poof and then be gone. Like, it should have some sort of longevity, especially when it's of this importance and this relevance.
That's a very good point. Any other panelists have anything to share?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, I think that news cycles are a very interesting phenomenon. And between June and August, there was a great deal of interest in the whole concept of Black narratives, Black African Caribbean narratives. Mm-hmm. And it was good in a way that people were listening and were interested, but it also represented a huge emotional burden and just lifestyle burden, just burden in general, on people of African, Black, and Caribbean descent who were asked to share all of their experiences and you know, educate everyone and use our art and, you know, produce all of these things that could be consumed by the general population for their edification or enjoyment or whatever. So, I mean, what I'd really like to see is a sustained effort at a reasonable level, a feasible level, to support artists and creators and producers of African, Black, and Caribbean heritage, rather than this focus on give us everything right now. Mm-hmm. And I know that when I talk to people in the arts community and the cultural community who are from African, Black, and Caribbean heritage, there's a sense of exhaustion that has kind of set in because of the level of interest and just the, you know, this swarm of interested parties that came forward and then suddenly disappeared almost as quickly as they had arrived. So what I'm interested in is a longer conversation beyond just, you know, the immediate aftermath of the martyrdom of George Floyd and others, to see how we can actually be recognized and valued on a long-term basis in our society.
I agree, long term as opposed to short term, because I noticed that normally discussion surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement, it's especially online, is rather performative. There's no real action behind it.
Right.
So it'll be great to see an actual movement. Any other panelists have anything to add?
I'm just going off of what Irene said. I know that I was telling a lot of my friends that I wasn't sure how I felt about Black Lives Mattering because of the questions and the change, the shift. There was a shift. Like, I don't know, I've lived most of my life just, protecting myself, sometimes trying to be invisible in some ways as a Black person at the same time as trying to, shout out that, yes, I'm here and I count and I belong. And it was just weird for all of a sudden everyone to be saying, oh, we see you. And it's like, well, wait. I don't know if I'm ready. I mean, I almost felt that way. It's like, I don't know if I'm ready to share with you all of a sudden because you decide you're ready to hear when all this time I've been saying, hear me, hear me, hear me. And, so to me, it was a little bit disconcerting to have all that attention. And yes, I hope that it's sustained, because for it to just happen to be like, an opening of the closet, and it's like, oh, let's see all the dirt that we've shoved in there on you. Oh, okay, and then slam shut and go on about their business. That's not going to work, There has to be some real difference in the way Black people, as artists, as individuals, as human beings, are looked upon and treated.
Because prior to the Black Lives Matter movement, there were a lot of Black people have been discussing their stories and sharing their experience that's often fell upon deaf ears. So this sudden notion to be like, what I call performative action, pretending to care initially when people have been stating their inconveniences, their experiences being a Black person.
And you know something? I won't even necessarily say they're pretending to care. I will reiterate also what Irene said about the news cycle. In that news cycle, in that moment, I won't doubt that they did genuinely care. But then the next thing came and they moved on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would add to that, I mean, I certainly had a ton of requests to speak, a ton of requests to educate people, a ton of requests for book lists and things of that nature over the course of the summer. But often it came with a little disclaimer that was along the lines, if you read between the lines, of give us all the content that you can, but nothing that's going to offend or upset or trigger us, right? So there was a desire to engage in a conversation around race relations, diversity, and inclusivity, but not necessarily a desire to really self-interrogate and look at what one's privilege means and how one might have to give up things to create a more equitable situation. So the number of, I can't speak for anybody else in this group, but the number of requests that I got that kind of had a little disclaimer in it about, don't do anything that upsets us, but tell us all about your experiences. I think it made it kind of suspect in terms of what people's intentions were. I do think that a lot of people genuinely cared up to the point that they can care without giving anything up or surrendering their privilege in any way.
I agree. If I can just say something. I know for me personally, it had an impact on my art and in my personal life. Like for the first time in a long time, because I've been speaking about my experience as a Black artist for a while, even though I've only been, putting my art out there for very short time from my perspective anyway. There was almost this this expectance for me to be the educator. Like I have to educate everyone around me as to like the do's and don'ts and how people should handle like the topic of racism and things like that. And it was a heavy burden. I can say that for sure. I've had numerous discussions with people about it, and some rather uncomfortable discussions. And if it's done one thing, it's actually opened my eyes and probably opened the eyes of a lot of other people, just how far we still have to go. I mean, we've made some progress. I'll say we've made some progress in putting a spotlight on these things, but we definitely have, you know, a bit of a way to go. And once the Black Lives Matter movement kind of started, you know, there was like this, almost like a blitz. Like people, they're feverish for it. They, you know, want it more and more and more. You know, give me as much as you can give me. But you know, as some of the other panelists said, you know, give me as much as you can give me, but you know, be sure not to offend us. And like I said, it happened in my personal life, but it's definitely, you know, it's definitely affected things in, you know, my artistry as well. Is You know, so we have, you know, we've made some progress, but there's some, you know, there's still some ground to cover.
Yeah.
So you know, that's my take on it.
From our point of view, from the coalition, we had the Walk for Justice, and the Black Lives Matter movement certainly inspired all of us. So we were out there with the same tone. But I think for our organization, a lot of the work came in really quick from our youth because they suddenly had these voices, and they were in pain also. The media didn't help, you know, because it was out there blatantly, you know, for the youth. So the questions were very deep, and that was something we were not prepared for as an organization, because you have to answer young people, you know, in the right way in order to help them get through this. So one of the things we had to do was let them have their voice at all of our program workshops in the beginning. And some of the questions were very, very deep for such young aged children. And then they started opening up about things that were happening to them. So it kind of opened up everybody's hearts. And the conversations are there now, and they're not going to go away. And I think it really gave people a voice to continue on with this. So it's been great from our point of view.
As some of you stated that people have requested that you make, when discussing race relations, make them comfortable so that as a Black artist, have things gotten easier?
I can answer first if you don't mind. I'm sorry. In my opinion, I think this question is too broad, if not too soon, to answer responsibly from our point of view, from the coalition. I personally don't think things have gotten easier because of all the tasks that have come before us now. We were not prepared as we thought we were, but it's a new beginning, and it's something that we can work with and grow with. But I think to answer that question from us would be, it's just not responsible at this point, because this is all just happening, over the last few months. But I'm sure that the work that's being done within these last few months is just amazing. But I think it's a little too soon to judge that, per se, from my point of view.
I would agree with what Joy has said in a sense. I mean, it's too soon, and we need a sense of perspective and the ability to kind of look back on what was accomplished in this remarkable era. And we're just at the start of it. So it's hard to know what the long-term effects are and how effective we were, or how easy it was, relatively speaking. But I will say, in terms of my own poetic practice, anytime that I was sharing poetry or performing poetry that was about the situation in the United States, I found that people in our region were very receptive to it. But if I turned the focus on Canadian racism, there was a lot more hesitation, reluctance, downright resistance, and sometimes aggression in the responses there too. And I think that says a lot about how we perceive ourselves as Canadians. We have a tendency to see ourselves in opposition to the United States, to say, well, they have this terrible racist history and we're so wonderful and welcoming here. Look at our Underground Railroad stories or whatever. And a real reluctance to look at the deep-seated but perhaps different nature of Canadian racism, And I find in terms of my poetic practice that that's a response I often engender in local people and people in our region. So that will take some time to break open and to get people thinking more about what racism looks like here in Canada, as opposed to in the United States, which we're so used to demonizing and vilifying all the time.
I can definitely agree with that, with what Irene just said. Even in my own poetry, when I've spoken out against, the racism that exists here, because there are a lot of people who would like to believe that racism does not exist in Canada, which unfortunately it's just not true. It's not true. It wears a different face. It's presented differently, a little more subtly, but it does exist here. But I've noticed too that when I speak all about the state of race relations in the United States, I get lots of thunderous applause. But when you direct it, at the community that you live in, and you ask them to take a look at themselves, I don't get the same kind of reception. I can say that for sure. And so I won't say it's gotten easier, but there's been a much better spotlight put on it. And I'd say that even it hasn't gotten easier, but it's definitely been easier to talk about. So not easier, but easier to talk about, because it's a hot topic right now. So people almost expect you to talk about it, but they definitely don't expect you to direct it towards them and ask them to to take a look at their their own reflection. So that's my take on it.
Leslie, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, it's been part of my artistic practice to make people uncomfortable. It's not my job to make them comfortable. It's my job to tell them the truth of the history that I perform. And in the conversations afterwards, I challenge them. Now, mind you, I'll qualify that and say that I don't perform that much around here. So I don't know too much about how my home community would necessarily respond to some of the conversations I have. I have to self-produce here, so I can't do that. I go to communities that pay me to come to perform. I challenge them. Even when I'm in schools, I will tell the white children that it is their job to get rid of racism, because I hate to tell them, but it's white people that created it, and if they're uncomfortable, so be it. But a lot of times teachers will be at the side going, the ones that are woke. And I'm always challenging people to try and think, I'm always telling Canadians about how, yeah, we like to recognize and applaud ourselves for being, the heroes of the Underground Railroad. But I mean, we had slavery here first, and, that only the Underground Railroad thing was only about 30 years. And then once slavery ended in the South, we were like, go home, y'all. We don't want those problems here. So, and I've been telling people this for years, and, that's, we have to challenge them. We have to make them uncomfortable. We can't be worried about how white people feel about their racism. I'm sorry. That's not our job.
It's true.
We've been coddling them all this time, protecting them from themselves. And that's not our job.
It's, if I may, I have a thought on this also. I believe we're majorly focusing in the wrong direction. Grown people aren't going to change. Like the way society is right now, current status, this is what we're going to die with. Like we're adults, right? And the focus seems to stay within the media as focused on adults, and we're losing track on what should be happening. The Black Lives Matter is definitely a powerful movement, and the only way I feel like it is going to ever gain its true relevance is when we start to focus on getting the children to understand that, because they're the ones that are going to essentially see any kind of solvent change from this. We're not going to be alive to see this change. So we got to stop focusing so much on how adults feel about it, right? Because we're lost causes, essentially. We're grown. We're not changing. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, or so to speak, okay? So what we need to focus more on, and the reason why I say this, because I have art classes and I teach young people, right? And they're the most absorbent of important information. They're more receptive to it. They want it more. They crave it more. And not only that, even for my own young children, my 11 and 9-year-old, they're like sponges for knowledge. They always want to know, always want to know. Whereas adults feel annoyed when you try to teach them anything about Black culture or Black history. It's almost like an inconvenience for grown people. And this is what through my personal observance of it, right?
I just want to say, Monty, fortunately, most of my performances are done in schools. And I start with performances on Black history with children in school in kindergarten. Beautiful. And goes right through adult. So I'm in there doing that, like you said.
Girl. That's right. You understand, and I hope that I'm not coming across as brass or anything, but we're not gonna. This change isn't gonna happen while I'm alive. I'm sorry, I can't see it happening, but I know one thing. We have generations of children. We have a lot of mixed culture children out there that are coming up in the school system. What are the schools prepared to do to launch this? Because that's where this is going to be rooted. It can't be in grown-up society and grown-up media. It's got to be within a school system starting at a really young age, because as it was rooted in, it must be rooted out. And that starts with the youth. Thank you.
I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. I want to ask you guys about your growing up roots. So in the past, we know Black parents typically they want their children to choose more traditional career paths, such as being a doctor, a lawyer, or a nurse, a teacher, so on. So as being an artist in a largely white middle class society, there's also a lack of lack of art education in our communities. So when you decided you wanted to pursue a career in the arts, were you supported? If so, by who? And what kind of comments did you hear regarding your career in the arts?
I started my art career at the tender age of 4. So I wasn't really looking for affirmation at that point. I got my energy from the cartoons and the things that I watched on TV. And those were the things that inspired me. Now, keep in mind, I come from a large family. I come from a family of 9, and we grew up in the core of Windsor, and we had limited resources. So from that perspective, even breaking through as an artist, you can imagine under those kind of circumstances how difficult that was. I had a lot of life experiences as a youth that maybe I shouldn't have. Right, I lived in a neighborhood where I was surrounded by a lot of cousins and uncles and aunts. Right, but somehow I managed to focus on the art, and that's what I say to my students whenever I have art students, is that if your life is such that it doesn't support what you want to do, then you have to try and bend your life a little bit. You have to make it so that you can do that, because nothing else is going to be as wholesome and pure to your life than something that you love and is something that you want to do for the rest of your life. I knew from a young age, which was an advantage for me, because I never at any point in my life wondered, what am I going to do? Like, I never had that feeling, not to say that I think that I'm better than anybody or anything, but I never had the experience of wondering what I was going to do with myself from a very young age. And it spawned into a great art career, like I expected it to. Not saying that I thought I was great or anything, but I worked hard. is what my point is. And I still work hard to this day. I have a very busy, active art studio. I own a paint party company. My wife and I run the art studio, and we do a lot of really wonderful projects here in the local area and other places. I try to be as available to outside communities as possible. I've done work from here to Kansas City, Montreal, Calgary on our side, on the Canadian side. So it's been an exciting ride for myself and my family now. It's wait and retire and see what happens next. As an artist, you never shut down shop. I'm always in my studio and always creating, and that's the beauty of what I do.
As I said at the beginning, my story is somewhat a story of how blocks could be put in the way of a young Black performer. When I was little, I always knew that I liked to sing and dance and play make-believe. I had a gymnastic teacher remind me about the time when I was in a gymnastics meet and I went to go compete on the beam, and I had 3 imaginary cows on my hand, and I gave them to the judge to hold on to, and she actually held the cows. Well, she marked me. I remember that. So I was always good at making other people believe what I make believe. But my favorite show when I was a child was The Sound of Music, and I wanted to be in The Sound of Music so badly. And my dad took me to audition for The Sound of Music. And in 1960s, I was never going to be a Von Trapp child. I loved to dance, and I took ballet. And despite the fact that I was one of the best dancers in my ballet studio, I was never sent, like the rest of the girls were, to audition for the National Ballet. I didn't have the right body type. So I did gymnastics because I could dance, and I did gymnastics and be an athlete and stuff. Then I went away and I went to school for about 6 weeks at the University of Michigan, and I saw the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. And I was reminded that I always wanted to dance. And it was the first time that I saw Black people dancing the way that I always wanted to dance. And that's what changed my life and made me go into, work to find a place where I could go to school and be a dancer, because my parents insisted I get a degree. I had to get a degree. I was supposed to be a doctor. My dad wanted me to study medicine and dance. And I was like, nah, it's gotta be one or the other, Dad. I gotta choose one, and he was not happy with my choice. But I did get my teaching certification that my parents insisted on. And I have managed to make a career out of the arts. And my father supported me by paying for my degree from the University of Michigan, which, was not inexpensive. So, I have had the support. And I have had to struggle, because even coming back from there, coming back to Windsor, there was no place for me in theater with my dance degree and my teacher certification. I couldn't get the job at Walkerville when they started it, despite the fact there was nobody else with a degree and teaching certification and experience teaching, because I had already taught in Detroit for 5 years by that time. So, through all of that, I ended up doing what I do now. So evidently that's how it was meant to happen in the long run. But that's because I was fortunate, and there were people that were behind me and people that paved a path for me. And that does not happen for all Black children in our community who want to do the arts, which is one of the reasons why I work with Arts Collective Theater, because at least they've opened a door. And it's one of the main reasons when I finally retire from touring, and I'm not ready to do that yet, my plan is to start an Afrocentric performing arts center where, the stories that are being told through theater are the stories that are for, by, and about Black people, African, Black, and Caribbean, where the artist designing the sets, creating the costumes, are people from our community. So that's what I like to do, because it's really, really important how we're represented, and we have to tell our stories to be represented properly. And evidently, we also have to do the lion's share of providing ourselves with the opportunities to do the things that we want to do, despite the fact that we do want the quote unquote mainstream society to open up to us and include us. I think that job is harder really than just trying to take care of ourselves and grow within ourselves. We've done that a number of times before, and we've succeeded. Mind you, our feet were cut out from under us, literally, but we succeeded, and we can succeed again. And one thing that I personally keep in mind when going through this pandemic is that 100 years ago, after the pandemic, following that was the Roaring Twenties.
Thank you for sharing that, Leslie. I'm happy you received support generally during your art career. We're approaching the Q&A portion of the discussion. Anybody else want to speak on their experience and the support? Eric?
Um, well, I can say when I was a child, I was obsessed with comic books. Like it's one of my favorite mediums. But growing up, there weren't a lot of comic book, Black comic book artists or illustrators or anything like that. And if there were, I wasn't privy to it. I didn't know about any. I can say I received a lot of support at home. Well, as much support as they could offer. There was three of us, and we're all artistically inclined, actually. But I can say I received a fair amount of support and encouragement at home. But when I was in school, this was not the case. I was very much treated as if I were intellectually inferior. I was told at one point that I would never read beyond a grade 3 level, basically. That that I should basically focus on getting a trade, learning a trade, because I would never be able to, achieve any of the goals that I aspired to. And one of my greatest aspirations was to be a writer in some form. I knew I wanted to tell stories. I loved telling stories and creating my own stories. And when I went to high school, I went to a trade school, actually. For all those who don't know, I went to Century High School over on California in Windsor, Ontario. I just never felt like I really fit. I mean, I was good at some of the trades that I tried, but I still found that my passion was really for writing, and I started writing poetry back then. But it wasn't until I met a Canadian poet named Dwayne Morgan. He came to visit my school. That I didn't think there was any kind of a future in writing poetry of any kind. So I focused more on, I kind of, I kept it hidden. I didn't really put it out there much until I met Dwayne Morgan. And after that, then I dabbled at it. I kind of played with it a little bit, but beyond that, I didn't really focus on it too much until after I graduated high school. And, and then I decided, I didn't care what anybody told me. I was going to be a storyteller of some kind. So considering the obstacles that had been put in my way when I was a child, and when I was a teenager or whatnot, I often try to lend my my expertise to like the local schools, because the one thing that drives me in doing my poetry and continuing to write stories and tell stories, I never want another child to feel the way I did when I was younger, especially any children of color, because I see how detrimental it was to my creativity. But and this is a point of self-pride, that I kept pushing until I got onto the stage at the local poetry slam, and I became the grand champion because I wouldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. And also, to continue further, I made it to the national stage at the Canadian Festival of Spoken Word, where I'd say that I did fairly well. So considering all those things, I've always tried to. I keep that. That's one of my drives. That's my inspiration, to keep pushing back against those who tried to tell me that I could not do it. And I'd say, as a Black artist, and I think many of the other panelists would agree with me, that it's our job to inspire the next generation. So even if we had an easier time getting into the arts, or if we had a harder time, we should strive to do our best to pave a way so that they can continue what we've started, so that they don't face the same obstacles. And if they do face the same obstacles, that they see us as an example as to what they can be. So that's my take on it.
Awesome.
Yeah, you
I
raised.
would add to that you know, it is incumbent on all of us as artists to do our best to pave the way and to keep lifting as we climb. But also it's the job of arts organizations and institutions to keep that space open, and not just during February. You know, everybody's got some sort of programming in February so they can tick a box and say that they're addressing and shining a light on Black artists. And in this era of Black Lives Matter, a lot of arts institutions and organizations are paying attention for a brief period, but we've got to keep that sustained next year and the year after and the year after to make sure there's more equitable space and more inclusive space, and that people of African, Black, and Caribbean descent are able to articulate their vision in the way that makes sense to them, and not just in a way that's palatable to the broader community, but that actually addresses our truth and our stories in a way that is authentic, and that people need to make space for that. None of us is as smart as all of us, and I think that all of us can create better art together, but we just have to be open to a multitude of voices that don't necessarily reflect the traditional canon.
We have some questions in the chat for you guys.
Excuse me.
Kay is asking, since the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, have you had an uncomfortable situation arise with a person close to you? If so, how did you handle it?
I was, I took a job a few months back at a different plant from the one I currently am employed at. Just during the COVID months, just doing some prospecting at a place. I had worked at this place for a couple of months. And there was a gentleman that worked there with me. We did on-site work where we would go and take off for the day and go work at a site. And this gentleman, he would come into the plant, into the shop, and strike up these conversations with me. Like, well, he would engage me with these kinds of conversations. Through another party that worked at this place, I found out that he had some nefarious connections with Proud Boys and right-wing groups like that, to the point where I saw on his truck one day that there were these insignias. I'm not going to mention any names, but keep in mind, I had been working with this person for a little while before I got any wind of any of this. So I physically saw the "don't tread on me" on his truck and all this stuff. So that afternoon, after I noticed that, I approached him in the shop and I asked him, do you feel uncomfortable working around me? Just a blatant question, straight up question. And he looked at me and he said, I absolutely do not have a problem working with you. Why? And that was his question to me. I says, well, I understand that the logos on your truck represent this, and right. And as far as he said, she said, I had heard some things previously, but I like to judge situations on my own. This person did confess to me that he was right-wing, far right affiliation, but for some strange reason, he attached himself to me before any of this had even taken place, this conversation. Just by me approaching him and asking him, do you have an issue? It felt like a sense of relief. Like I could see the relief wash over his face. Like, I'm so glad you asked. Now we can talk about it. For the rest of the time, the little bit of time that I was currently employed there, he couldn't get enough of me. He wanted to engage this conversation where he could say things, right? Say things that were on his mind, but he never thought in a million years that I would, one, show up at his place of employment as an employee and then open up that conversation, engage him in that conversation. That to me, that was a good sign in that even though that person was who he was, I was able to initiate conversation and work alongside that person in harmony. He loved working with me, he loved the way that I work, but we both had a mutual understanding that, okay, this is what we do. And ever since then, I've had a little bit more hope in that transition happening later on down the road, because a situation like that, what are the chances that I'm going to end up working and being that closely entangled with somebody who has those types of beliefs?
I didn't have an uncomfortable situation, but I did take it upon myself to write to a company. I was watching a NutraVitamins commercial one time, and it was talking about their hair, nails, and skin gummies or something. And it said that it gave you silky hair. So I wrote to them and I told them about how, Black girls don't necessarily have silky hair. And that was somewhat exclusionary and racist, and that I explained to them some of my childhood things, putting the towel on my head and jumping from the ottoman and shaking it so that I could try and emulate silky, flying blonde hair, but how that wasn't going to happen. And that, it was really insensitive and they should change it. Well, lo and behold, I saw the commercial a couple of weeks ago and they've changed it.
I feel that you vocalized your opinion to them and that had an impact on their future commercials.
I also asked, if I just might add, I also asked them to make sure that they change the representation at the table so that those kinds of things would not be, not under consideration in the future. And the woman who wrote back to me assured me that they were trying to make changes, yes. So I'm hopeful.
Fingers crossed. We're at 7:59 right now, so I'm just gonna ask one more question and then we're just gonna wrap up. Let me just pick a question. Leslie Harper is asking, what do the people on this panel visualize as the end game for all this?
I can speak on that a little bit. I think I don't think there's ever going to be an end game. I think this is going to be an ongoing struggle, and it's just going to get better as we go along. I mean, as we see in every other country, there's different types of struggles that are similar. I don't think it's going to end. I think this is going to be something that's going to be with us for a long time, but it's just about how we handle it, how we come together as a community, and how we work together. We have to get to that point. But as far as an end game, I don't think there'll ever be one. That's it.
I would say that when I'm doing my teaching, my end game is long term. I don't expect that I will see change. I don't necessarily expect that my son will see change. I don't necessarily expect that my grandchildren will see change. And I tell the children that what I'm trying to do with them is just plant some seeds. And then I'm hoping that those trees will grow and plant seeds, and that eventually, some generations down, that there will be a forest of humanity and goodwill. And I truly believe that in the long run, that's ultimately going to happen. So I think that the end game will be eventually, we were different people before racism was created. We treated people differently. I'm hoping that eventually we will evolve to a point as people that where racism is no longer necessary. Maybe, a new regionalism or something will start, but not racism. And, I hope to be born again during that period.
Great. My goodness.
The end game, I believe the end game for racism is going to be an entirely mixed race society. It's inevitable. That's an idea that people are going to have to start getting used to. As far as the race the race wars or the race conflicts. It's always going to be that way until race is reckoned with by mixed culture. The racism is always going to be there. The mixed culture is the game for that. I know that was deep, huh, Aaron? Go ahead.
If I could just add to that, the end game, I'd say, it's just, education, respect, acceptance, the keys to life, the things that everybody, receives, live and let live. I agree with Monty. I think, until race can be reckoned with, but there will always be some kind of conflict. And until, we just accept, people for their differences and focus more on our similarities and less on our differences, there will always be some kind of an issue. But I think as, time goes on, we're going to have our ups and downs, but, we're going to be, in a state of just, improvement. What wasn't so good, yesterday might be better tomorrow. What isn't so good today might be better, in times to come. So I don't necessarily say there will be an end to it all, but I'd say, there will be progress.
I agree with that.
I would add to that I mean, we have a pretty diverse community and a pretty diverse society, but we need to move from diversity to inclusion. And without truth, there is not reconciliation ever. So artists, people who perform in the arts, people who engage in writing and painting and all of the other forms of art, music, they have a real role to play in terms of telling the truth so that we can bring about reconciliation. And I just want to quote Chinua Achebe because he's so brilliant in the way that he addresses this question. Those who tell you do not put too much politics in your art are not being honest. If you look very carefully, you will see that they are the same people who are quite happy with the situation as it is. What they are saying is don't upset the system. So I think that a big strategy to get us to the end game is for artists to keep continuing to disrupt and share the truth as much as we can.
I agree with all you guys. Progress has been made, but progress needs to continue to be made in order for us to see any actual change for our, as you stated before, we're not experiencing this definite change, but maybe our children or children's children can experience it. I just want to thank all the panelists for joining us for this great discussion. I'm looking at the chat and I see a lot of the audience really appreciates this discussion. I'm gonna pass it on to Sophie for the conclusion.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you everyone. And on behalf of the board and the staff of the Art Gallery of Windsor, I'd like to thank Making It Awkward for partnering on this initiative with us and really leading this discussion. I'd like to thank our panelists, Leslie, Joy, Eric, Monty, and Irene for taking part in this honest discussion and sharing with us and in our community your experience. And there's so many good questions we didn't get the chance to get to tonight, but we hope that this is the first of many panels that we'll have the chance to put on and partake in. And we hope that these conversations continue as we continue to listen, unlearn, relearn, grow, support, uplift, and collaborate. I also wanted to thank everyone who tuned in tonight. This event was recorded and will be available online soon. So thank you everyone, and thank you Jessica for leading the conversation. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much and take care.
Thank you for having us.
Okay.
Thank you guys.